All right, so today we're going to talk about the PDK transmission and why I don't like it. Where do I start? Nothing in this world is perfect. There's always a sacrifice. This transmission is a great example of that. All right, so first things first, this transmission is, as far as dual clutches go, considered to be one of the best. I specifically was looking for a PDK car when I picked up this 911. The fact that it was a 911 actually came second to the fact that it had the PDK. I've had it for about a month, and I wish I bought it manual. The main reason why I don't like it, and this is probably going to color the entire review of the transmission, but I will try to be non-biased about it. When I was doing research on this car, there was a lot of talk about PDK failures. And basically, long story short, if electrical components inside the transmission go out, Porsche does not allow, it's not that they don't allow it, it's just they didn't distribute the information to allow mechanics, independent mechanics or dealers to work on the transmission. Instead, what they do is they call the whole transmission a bust, you ship it back to Porsche, and they give you a new one. All for the price tag of $15,000 to $25,000. Now, this isn't a problem if you're like most people and you're wealthy and you bought a Porsche because you have some money and you bought it new. But the second these cars are out of warranty, they kind of become ticking time bombs. Now, if you look at the forums and stuff, it could look like doom and gloom and like these things are going to be prone to explode whenever, and that's obviously not the case. By the nature of forums, only people going to the forums are the people who have a problem to complain about. You will find some people who talk about, oh, well, you know, the transmissions, that can happen, but it's less than 5%, and every car has its own issue. I'll argue every car has its own issue, yes, but not many of them are $25,000 issues. This almost steered me away from buying the car. Instead, I decided I'll give it a go, trust the experts. If the transmission was such a failure, then surely I would have heard about it by now. Well, shortly after I bought the car, the transmission went into limp mode, and I got the dreaded transmission emergency run error message on my dash. This would usually indicate a tanked PDK. Not what you want to hear when you've stretched yourself to buy your first Porsche. I turned the car off, towed it home, and by the time I got home, it was running fine. I was like, huh, okay, so it's definitely an electrical issue. I started driving it again, and within a week, less than a week actually, it failed again. So the transmission learns why you drive, right? That means it's storing information, which means, like all computers, it probably gets a little clogged up, which is going to affect how it can process and how it actually operates. So I thought, I bet you there's a way to format the memory of the transmission. I Googled it, and sure enough, there was. You can format the memory of the transmission. So I did it. Basically what you do is you turn the car on and you run it with the air conditioning off for 3 minutes, then you turn the air conditioning on for 3 minutes, and then you turn the car off, close the door, and exit the car, wait 1 minute, and when you turn the car back on, the transmission is supposedly wiped. It's honestly not a very reassuring process, and there's no real indicators that you've done anything right or wrong when you do it, with the exception of as soon as you start driving it, there is a noticeable difference in how the transmission operates. In my case, it was a lot smoother. I've been dailing it for a month now, and it hasn't failed yet. For those of you who are wondering, my transmission failure codes were P1991 and P1990. Those are not the ones that typically indicate a huge failure. Maybe I fixed it, time will tell. So that extremely frightening situation aside, let's talk about how the transmission drives. As soon as you drive this car, it is very clear that it is a manual transmission that is controlled by a computer. That is very obvious as you drive this car. And not in a good way, unless you're on track. What do I mean by that? Okay, so when you're driving an automatic car, you don't want it to intervene in you. When you're in traffic like I am now, you don't want it to let you know that it's there. You want it to be invisible. This transmission, if you're in full automatic mode, first gear is extremely clunky, just like it would be with a manual transmission. So I thought, well, it's a computer controlling it, so it'll probably be a smooth shift to first gear. That's not the case. It still has that huge jump. And honestly, it kind of feels like the clutch is slipping a little, so I want to have it serviced and see if that makes it feel better. When you floor it, it tries to predict what you want it to do, right? So it'll shift earlier for regular driving and shift later for aggressive driving. That's a good thing, that's cool, except for when it gets confused. So for example, if you want to get to the speed limit quickly, but you don't want to get arrested, you typically will floor it and then let off the gas. Usually this will happen in second gear. If you do that in this car, it'll change the way it shifts, and you may be letting off the gas as it's trying to upshift. And then it gets confused, and there's like this jarring, jumping kind of thing, and it's not comfortable. On the other hand, if you launch it from a dig and you just floor it the whole way, commit to what you're doing, then it's magic. So the automatic mode feels like a compromise. It doesn't quite handle the automatic functions quite as well as you would like, and the more performance-oriented aspects of it really only have any value on a racetrack. For most people driving this car, they do it in traffic like this. In that case, it is not the best transmission to have. I'd rather have a manual, because I can cruise in second and third and just let the RPMs ride out a little bit. Sure, my gas mileage won't be as good, but my overall driving experience will actually be smoother and more comfortable. So let's talk about the manual mode of the PDK. That's what it's all about, right? One of the advantages of having this car is you can crack off downshifts and upshifts, particularly downshifts, at speed without losing momentum. That's hugely important for on track. One of the first skills you learn when you learn how to drive cars aggressively is heel-toe downshifting. This car will rev match your downshift perfectly every single time. However, there is a caveat. When you shift, there's about a half-second delay. Kind of makes it hard to time the red line. I know the transmission got better with the second generation of PDK that came out in a 991. It's supposed to be a lot snappier, and I hope more reliable, but the forums would indicate probably not. Surely it has to be more reliable. Because this is literally the first production year, or first or second production year that they had the transmission. So of course it's going to have some issues. Do I recommend the PDK transmission? I guess we'll pull in. Let's see if that works. Yep, that did the trick. Go into the car meet and the cops are headed there too. Not a good sign. Not a good sign. Where was I? So if you want a race car, PDK transmission is the way to go. It's the highest performance option. If you want a car that's a riot and you're not particularly a sports driver, then maybe get a Tiptronic in a high horsepower car. If you're a car enthusiast who cares more about driving feel than laps and riots, then I say get a manual every time. There's no replacement for it. Not yet anyway.